When we think about how children learn their first language, the answer is always simple. They listen. Before they ever speak a single word, they spend months and months listening to the people around them, listening to conversations, listening to the sounds of words, and listening to how language flows naturally. That is exactly why learning English through listening to stories can be so powerful. Stories are not just sentences put together. They are experiences, emotions, and situations expressed in language. When you listen to a story, you are not only hearing words, you are also feeling how those words work together, how emotions are expressed, and how ideas are communicated. This is why listening to stories is one of the most natural and effective ways to improve your English. Think about it. When you hear a story, you don't just hear isolated vocabulary lists or grammar rules. You hear the words in action. You hear how questions are asked, how answers are given, how descriptions create pictures in your mind, and how conversations flow. This makes learning English feel less like memorizing and more like living the language. Listening to a story brings the language alive in your imagination. You start to connect words with feelings and images, and this connection makes the words stay in your mind much longer than if you had only studied them on paper. Another beautiful thing about learning English through stories is that it doesn't feel heavy or boring. Sometimes when we sit down with grammar books or long lists of rules, we feel tired and unmotivated. But when you are listening to a story, your mind is focused on the characters, the emotions, and what happens next. You want to know the ending, so you keep listening. And without even realizing it, you are absorbing new words, new phrases, and the natural rhythm of English. This is learning without pressure. It feels effortless because the story pulls you forward. Listening also trains your ears to recognize sounds. English has many sounds that may not exist in your native language, and sometimes reading alone cannot help you master them. But when you listen, your ears get used to these sounds, and your mouth slowly learns how to copy them. Over time, your pronunciation becomes clearer, your speaking becomes smoother, and you begin to sound more natural. This is why people who listen a lot to English always have an easier time speaking it. Listening is the foundation of good speaking. Now you might ask, why stories? Why not just listen to the news or lectures or conversations? The answer is simple. Stories are memorable. Our brains are wired to remember stories. When something is told as a story with a beginning, middle, and end, it becomes easier to recall. You might forget a random word you studied yesterday, but you will remember a word you heard in a story where a character used it with emotion. The human mind connects better with stories because we all love to imagine, to picture events, to connect with characters, and to feel emotions through words. This makes learning English through stories not only more enjoyable, but also more effective. When you make stories a daily habit, you give yourself constant exposure to English in a way that feels natural. Even if you listen for just 15 minutes a day, those 15 minutes are powerful because they build up over time. Each day you add a little more to your listening ability, and before you know it, you will notice how your understanding has improved, how you can follow conversations more easily, and how your own speaking becomes more confident. The most important thing is consistency. The more you listen, the faster you learn. Just like a child learns their language by listening again and again, you too can train your mind by listening regularly. You don't need to understand every single word. What matters is that you keep going, keep listening, and keep letting the language surround you. Over time, your brain will do the work for you. It will start to recognize patterns, it will connect meanings, and it will prepare you to speak more naturally. So remember this, listening is not just an exercise. It is the heart of language learning. If you want to speak well, you must first listen well. If you want to express your thoughts clearly, you must first hear how thoughts are expressed. And if you want to enjoy learning English instead of struggling with it, stories will always be your best guide. Let the language enter through your ears. Let the stories paint pictures in your mind, and soon you will find your voice in English with ease. One of the biggest challenges in learning English is not just memorizing new words, but knowing how to use them correctly and pronouncing them in a way that others can understand. Many learners try to improve their vocabulary by studying long lists of words, but very often those words don't stay in memory for long, or they don't come out naturally when speaking. The reason is simple. Words are not meant to live alone. They live in sentences, in conversations, and in real situations. That is why learning vocabulary through context is so powerful. When you hear or read a word inside a story, you understand how it is used, what kind of emotion it carries, and how it connects with other words. This makes vocabulary stick in your mind and become a part of your active language, not just something you recognize on paper. Imagine listening to a story where a character says, "She whispered softly in the dark." If you had only studied the word whisper on a vocabulary list, you might know its meaning, but in the story, you can hear it in action. You can feel the softness of the voice, you can imagine the situation, and you can even hear the sound of the word itself. That emotional connection gives the word more power in your memory. The next time you want to describe a quiet voice, the word whisper will come to you naturally because you learned it in context. This is the magic of vocabulary learning through stories. The same thing happens with pronunciation. Reading a word is not enough to know how to pronounce it. English spelling can be tricky, and sometimes the way a word looks on paper is very different from the way it sounds. But when you listen to stories, you don't just see the word, you hear it. You hear how it flows with the words before and after it, how the stress is placed, and how the rhythm of the sentence makes the sound more natural. Over time, your ears begin to recognize the correct pronunciation, and your mouth learns to copy it. This is why listening in context is much more effective than repeating words in isolation. Think about the word enough. If you only read it, you might pronounce it wrongly because the letters don't clearly show the sound. But when you hear it inside a sentence, that's enough for today. You not only learn how it sounds, but also when it is used, what it means in real situations, and even the tone of voice that usually comes with it. You are not just learning a word. You are learning how to live with the word, how to use it, and how to express it naturally. Context also gives you multiple examples of the same word, and this repetition helps your brain lock it in. If you only study a word once, it may disappear from your memory. But when you encounter it in different parts of a story, in different situations, it becomes familiar, like meeting the same friend again and again. Slowly, the word becomes part of your own speech. You don't have to force yourself to remember it. It comes naturally when you need it. Another important benefit is that context teaches you the right combinations of words. In English, some words often appear together, and using them correctly makes your speaking more natural. For example, you don't just make a decision. You might also reach a decision or come to a decision. When you listen to stories, you hear these natural patterns again and again. Later, when you speak, your brain recalls them automatically, and your language sounds smooth and confident instead of translated word by word. And let's not forget pronunciation at the sentence level. Words don't exist in isolation when we speak. They connect, they blend, and sometimes sounds even disappear. For example, in fast speech, going to often becomes gonna. You won't learn this from a dictionary, but you will hear it clearly in stories and dialogues. This helps you understand native speakers better and also makes your own speaking sound more natural. The more you listen and read in context, the richer your vocabulary becomes. You stop memorizing words like empty shells and start collecting them as living tools that you can actually use. And as your vocabulary grows, your confidence in speaking grows too, because you are no longer struggling to find words. You already know how they sound, how they fit into sentences, and how they express emotions. So remember, vocabulary and pronunciation are not learned by force. They are absorbed through context, through listening, through feeling the language in real situations. Stories give you this gift every time you open yourself to them. Each sentence is not just teaching you new words, it is shaping the way you speak and the way you connect with English. If you want your words to stay in your mind and your voice to sound natural, then let the context of stories be your teacher. One of the most important truths about language learning is this: listening always comes before speaking. You cannot expect to produce something that you have not yet received. Just as a child listens for months and months before ever saying a word, you too must fill your mind with the sounds, rhythm, and flow of English before your speaking becomes natural and fluent. This is not a shortcut. It is the real path. If you want to speak easily and with confidence, the first step is always to listen. When you listen carefully, you are not only hearing words, you are training your brain. You are teaching your ears to recognize the sounds of English. You are learning how words are pronounced, and you are observing how sentences are built. This silent training creates a foundation for your speaking. Without this foundation, speaking becomes difficult because you will always stop and think. You will always translate in your head, and your words will not flow. But with enough listening, your mind becomes familiar with the music of the language, and speaking begins to happen naturally. Think for a moment about music. When someone wants to play an instrument, they do not start by performing immediately. First, they listen to the music again and again until the sound becomes a part of them. Only then do they begin to play, and when they play, it feels smooth because their ears already know what is right. Learning English is exactly the same. Listening is your training ground, and speaking is your performance. The better your training, the easier your performance. Listening also helps to reduce the fear of speaking. Many learners feel nervous when they speak because they are unsure if their words are correct or if they sound natural. But when you have listened enough, you carry in your mind a library of sentences, expressions, and sounds. You are no longer guessing. You are repeating patterns that you already know work. This gives you confidence because your brain is not inventing language. It is simply recalling what it has heard. That is why fluent speakers are always good listeners first. It is also important to understand that speaking fluently does not mean speaking quickly. Fluency means speaking smoothly, without constant pauses and without struggling to find words. And this smoothness comes only when your brain has already absorbed the language through listening. Imagine pouring water into a glass. If the glass is empty, nothing will flow out. But if the glass is full, even overflowing, then when you tip it, the water comes out easily. Listening fills your mind with language, and speaking is simply the natural overflow. When you listen to stories, dialogues, and conversations, you are not just improving comprehension. You are preparing yourself to speak. Every time you hear a sentence, your brain takes note of how it sounds and how it is structured. Later, when you need to express something similar, your brain will recall that structure and allow you to produce it with ease. This is why people who listen a lot to English often surprise themselves. They suddenly say a phrase or a sentence they never studied directly, but because they heard it many times, it comes out naturally. That is the power of listening first. And fluency is more than just words. It is rhythm, tone, and emotion. You can only learn these by listening. A textbook might tell you what words to use, but only listening shows you how those words rise and fall in real speech, how a question sounds different from a statement, how excitement has a different tone than sadness. These details cannot be memorized, they must be absorbed. Once absorbed, they come out naturally when you speak, giving your English a life and energy that rules and grammar charts alone can never provide. The beauty of this process is that it does not require you to force yourself. You do not need to push speaking before you are ready. If you listen enough, speaking will come to you, and when it comes, it will not feel like a struggle. It will feel like a release. You will find yourself speaking more fluently because the language has been living inside you all along. So never underestimate the power of listening. Every minute you spend listening to English is a step toward fluency in speaking. Do not rush the process. Trust it. Let your ears guide your mouth, because the more you listen, the more natural your speech will become, and the easier it will be for you to express yourself with clarity and confidence. If you want your English to flow, first let it flow into your ears. One of the most powerful reasons to learn English through stories is the way they connect with both imagination and memory. Human beings are naturally drawn to stories. From the time we are very young, stories capture our attention, spark our curiosity, and stay in our minds long after we hear them. This is not an accident. The human brain is built to remember stories better than facts or isolated information. And when you combine the power of imagination with the process of learning a language, something truly remarkable happens. You don't just memorize words, you live them. When you read or listen to a story in English, your mind begins to create images. You picture the characters, the places, the emotions, and the events. This process of visualization gives language life inside your mind. Instead of being a collection of abstract sounds, the words become connected to scenes and experiences. For example, if you learn the word forest through a story that describes a character walking through a dark, mysterious forest, your imagination paints the picture for you. That picture is powerful. It makes the word unforgettable. Later, when you hear or use the word forest, your brain doesn't just recall a definition. It recalls the entire image, the feelings, and the atmosphere that came with it. This is how imagination strengthens memory. Without imagination, learning can feel mechanical and heavy. You try to force words into your memory, but they slip away quickly because they are not tied to anything meaningful. Stories solve this problem. They provide meaning, emotion, and imagery that anchor the language deeply in your mind. Each time you engage with a story, you are not only practicing English, you are building a bridge between language and memory. That is why you might forget a list of vocabulary you studied last week, but still remember a line or a scene from a story you read months ago. Another important thing about stories is that they create an emotional connection. We remember what touches us emotionally. When a character is happy, sad, scared, or brave, we feel it too. Those feelings make the language stronger in our memory. For example, when you hear a line like, "She cried quietly in the corner," you don't just learn the word cried. You feel the sadness, and that emotion makes the word stick. Language becomes unforgettable when it is tied to emotion, and stories are full of emotion. Imagination also makes practice enjoyable. Learning a language is not just about discipline, it is also about motivation. If you enjoy the process, you will continue with it longer. and you will improve faster. Stories give you this joy because they invite you to escape into another world while still learning. You may travel to a castle, a village, a busy city, or even another century, all while improving your English. The mind loves this kind of journey. It never feels like hard work, yet the results are powerful. Another way stories help memory is through repetition in a natural way. In every story, certain words, expressions, or patterns appear more than once. Unlike mechanical drills, this repetition doesn't feel forced. It feels like part of the adventure. Each time you hear a phrase in a new situation, it becomes clearer and more familiar. Soon, you find yourself remembering it without effort. That is the gift of learning vocabulary and grammar through stories. And let's not forget that imagination is also practice for real, life communication. When you imagine scenes while listening to a story, you are preparing your mind for real conversations. You are practicing the skill of connecting words to situations. Later, when you face similar situations in life, your mind recalls what it has already imagined, and you find the right words more easily. This is why learners who use stories often speak with more creativity and flexibility. They are not just repeating memorized sentences. They are expressing ideas with the support of a trained imagination. Stories are also timeless teachers. You can return to the same story many times and discover new language each time. The first time, you may only understand the main events. The second time, you notice new words. The third time, you pay attention to how sentences are built. Each return strengthens your memory because the imagination is already familiar with the story, and the language finds deeper roots inside you. So when you think about the best way to improve your English, remember that stories are not just entertainment. They are training for your imagination, and they are anchors for your memory. They make language real, emotional, and unforgettable. If you want English to stay alive in your mind, let stories be the bridge between imagination and memory. One of the secrets to making real progress in English is consistency. It is not about how much you study in one day, but about how often you return to the language. And one of the best tools you can use for this daily practice is graded readers. Graded readers are stories written at different levels of difficulty, designed to match your stage of learning. They are simple enough to understand, yet rich enough to teach you new words, phrases, and sentence patterns. Practicing daily with them creates a rhythm of learning that builds results much faster than irregular, heavy study sessions. The reason daily practice works so well is because language learning is like exercising a muscle. If you go to the gym once a month and train very hard, your body will not become stronger. But if you go every day or every other day and do smaller, consistent exercises, your muscles grow steadily. The same is true for English. When you give your mind a little English every single day, it stays active, sharp, and ready to absorb more. With graded readers, this daily habit becomes enjoyable instead of stressful. You don't feel overwhelmed by difficult texts. Instead, you move step by step, building strength as you go. Another advantage of graded readers is that they are stories, not textbooks. This means you are learning language in context, while also enjoying a plot and characters. The interest in the story keeps you motivated to come back every day. Even if you only have 10 or 15 minutes, that short time still makes a big difference because it adds to your listening and reading exposure. Each day you practice, you are reinforcing what you learned yesterday and preparing yourself for what you will learn tomorrow. This creates momentum, and momentum is what leads to quick results. Some learners make the mistake of thinking they must understand everything perfectly before moving on. But graded readers are designed so that you don't have to worry about knowing every single word. The language is controlled and repeated in a natural way. so you can still follow the story even if a few words are new. Over time, those words appear again and again, and eventually they become familiar. This natural repetition saves you from the frustration of constantly stopping to check a dictionary, and it trains your brain to guess meaning from context. That is a powerful skill for real-life communication. Daily practice with graded readers also improves confidence. Every time you finish a chapter or a story, you feel a sense of achievement. That feeling of progress gives you motivation to continue. Without daily practice, learners often feel stuck because they don't notice improvement. But when you engage with English every day, even for a short time, you see yourself moving forward step by step. This steady progress builds confidence in your ability, and confidence is essential for speaking fluently. Another benefit is that daily exposure prevents forgetting. If you only study once in a while, your brain quickly forgets what you learned before, and you feel like you are starting again each time. But when you practice daily, the language stays fresh. You don't have to fight to remember because the words and structures are always there in your short-term memory, ready to be transferred into your long-term memory. The more often you see and hear them, the deeper they sink into your mind. Graded readers are also flexible. You can choose topics and stories that interest you, which makes the habit easier to maintain. If you love adventures, you can read an adventure story. If you enjoy romance, you can choose that. The key is that the language is matched to your level, so you are always challenged but never discouraged. And as you improve, you can move from easier levels to more advanced ones, feeling your growth with every step. This creates a clear path from beginner to fluent, with no gaps in between. Daily practice does not need to be long or complicated. Even 15 minutes with a graded reader can be powerful, especially if you make it a habit. Some days you may feel tired or busy, but even a few pages can keep your connection with the language alive. The important thing is not the length of time, but the regularity. Day after day, small efforts add up to big results. So if you truly want to see improvement in your English, don't wait for the perfect moment or the perfect amount of time. Start with what you have today. Pick up a graded reader, read or listen for a few minutes, and repeat it tomorrow. This daily rhythm will transform your learning because the power of small, consistent steps is greater than any single burst of effort. If you want to see real progress, let daily practice with graded readers become your path to quick results. When we choose a story to learn English with, it is important that the story does more than just provide language. A powerful story should also touch the heart, shape the mind, and leave behind lessons that stay with us long after the final page. That is why some stories feel timeless. They not only help us improve our vocabulary, grammar, and listening, but they also guide us in understanding life itself. A story like this becomes more than practice. It becomes a companion in our journey of both language and personal growth. Through such a story, you are not only learning how to read and listen to English, you are also experiencing the emotions of the characters, the struggles they face, and the decisions they make. Every chapter gives you sentences and expressions to practice, but at the same time, it gives you moral lessons that shape your perspective. Language enters your mind and wisdom enters your heart. That combination makes the learning experience unforgettable. When you follow a character's journey, you notice how they speak, how they describe their feelings, and how they respond to challenges. Each dialogue becomes an opportunity to improve listening and speaking, but each moment of struggle or courage also becomes an opportunity to reflect on yourself. For example, when a character chooses honesty over comfort or patience over anger, you are reminded of the power of values. You are not just listening to English, you are listening to life being taught through words. This kind of learning is deeper because the language is tied to meaning. You don't just remember words because you studied them. You remember them because they carried an emotion, a decision, or a moral truth. The words forgive, endure, or hope become clearer when you see them lived out by a character. They stop being just vocabulary, and they become part of your own thinking. That is why stories with moral lessons are so effective for language learners. They leave an impression on both memory and character. It is also inspiring to see how stories often show growth. Characters start with difficulties, weaknesses, or mistakes, but through their journey, they learn, change, and become stronger. As a learner, you can connect to this growth. Just as the character struggles at first, you may also struggle with English, but just as the character does not give up, you are reminded to continue. Their courage feeds your determination. Their patience encourages your own. Their growth mirrors the growth you are seeking in your language and in your life. Another important part of moral lessons in stories is empathy. When you step into the shoes of a character, you learn to feel what they feel. You experience sadness, joy, loneliness, and triumph through their eyes. This not only makes the story more engaging, but also teaches you how to express emotions in English. You learn the language of feelings while also learning the value of understanding others. This is a skill that helps you in communication and in relationships beyond language learning. Listening to or reading a story with strong moral lessons also gives you topics for reflection and conversation. You can discuss the choices characters make, the values they hold, and the lessons they teach. These conversations not only improve your speaking practice, but also deepen your thinking. You are not only practicing English, you are practicing the art of reflection and discussion, which are vital parts of communication. And there is something very special about combining language with morality. It makes the time you spend learning meaningful. Instead of seeing English as just a subject to study, you see it as a window to understanding human nature, society, and values. This makes your learning richer and your motivation stronger. You are not simply chasing fluency, you are also growing as a person. That is a reward far greater than language alone. So when you listen to a story like this, pay attention not only to the vocabulary and pronunciation, but also to the values hidden inside. Ask yourself what lessons the characters are teaching. Notice how their struggles connect to your own life. Let the story give you both the words to speak and the wisdom to live, because when a story can do both, your learning becomes complete. If you want English to shape not only your tongue, but also your heart, let such a story guide you with both language skills and moral lessons. Thank you for joining me on this journey of learning English through stories. Remember, daily listening and practice will guide your words, strengthen your confidence, and enrich your life with both language and values. Keep learning, keep speaking, and let every story bring you closer to fluency.